Imagine being sealed alive in a stone chamber beneath the earth with only a lamp, a loaf of bread, and the sound of your own breathing to keep you company as they pile dirt over the entrance above your head. This wasn't the plot of a horror story. This was the fate of some of the most powerful women in ancient Rome, and it happened over and over again for more than 1,000 years. In the year 114 BC, a woman named Aemilia stood in the Forum Romanum, wearing the distinctive white robes that marked her as one of Rome's most sacred priestesses. She had spent 15 years of her life tending the eternal flame, 15 years of devotion to a city that was about to bury her alive. But here's what makes her story far more disturbing than a simple tale of cruelty. Aemilia wasn't some helpless victim plucked from obscurity and thrown into servitude. She was one of the most privileged, most powerful women in the entire Roman world, and that was precisely why she had to die. The Vestal Virgins occupied a position in Roman society that seems almost impossible to our modern minds. Selected between the ages of 6 and 10 from Rome's most elite families, these girls were taken from their fathers, homes, and given something no other Roman woman could possess: legal independence. While every other woman in Rome lived her entire life under the control of a father, husband, or male guardian, the Vestals belonged to no man. They could own property, they could make wills, they could overturn death sentences simply by crossing paths with a condemned criminal in the street. Their word in court required no oath because Romans believed they were incapable of lying. They had seats of honor at every public spectacle, and assault against them was punishable by death. For 30 years they would live this extraordinary life, suspended in the liminal space between girlhood and womanhood, wielding power that senators' wives could only dream of. The price for this power was absolute: 30 years of perfect chastity, 30 years of keeping the sacred flame burning, because if that flame died, Rome itself would fall. But there was another side to this bargain, one that reveals something deeply unsettling about how human societies create privilege only to destroy it. The same qualities that made the Vestals powerful: their separation from normal life, their sacred status, their visibility, made them perfect sacrifices when things went wrong. And in 114 BC, everything was going wrong. Rome's wars were failing. Omens of disaster appeared in the skies. The gods were angry, and someone had to pay. The priests examined the Vestals and found 3 women guilty of breaking their vows. But if you look closely at what actually happened, you'll see something that should make your blood run cold. These women probably weren't guilty of anything except being available when Rome needed someone to blame. If stories like this fascinate you, if you want to explore the darkest corners of history where power and horror intertwine, please subscribe. These aren't just ancient stories. They're mirrors that show us how societies choose their victims, how privilege can be a trap, and how the most honored among us can become the most vulnerable. There's so much more darkness to uncover. The trial that condemned Aemilia, Licinia, and Marcia wasn't about justice. It was about terror management. When the haruspices, Rome's priests who interpreted omens, declared that the Vestals must be examined, they weren't following evidence. They were following a script that Rome had performed many times before. A slave came forward with accusations. Think about how extraordinary that was. In Roman society, slaves couldn't normally testify against free citizens, but when it came to Vestals, all normal rules evaporated. The pollution these women supposedly caused was considered so dangerous that any evidence, no matter how tainted, could be used against them. The Pontifical College, the board of priests with jurisdiction over the Vestals, investigated and reached their verdict. Aemilia was guilty. Licinia and Marcia were innocent. Aemilia was buried alive. But the Roman people weren't satisfied. The crisis hadn't passed. Clearly, the priests had gotten it wrong. So the Senate did something unprecedented. They established a special court to retry the case, overriding religious authority with political necessity. This new court found all 3 women guilty. What was the evidence? No witness saw them with men. No one testified to specific acts. The case seems to have rested on the fact that young men had visited the house of the Vestals and that the priestesses had been seen talking with men at religious festivals. They were convicted, in other words, of being young women who interacted with young men in the normal course of life in Rome. But Rome needed its sacrifice. When Licinia and Marcia were led to their underground chambers, when they were sealed beneath the earth with their pathetic provisions of bread and water, when the dirt was piled high and smoothed over as if nothing lay beneath, Rome could breathe again. The gods had been appeased. The pollution had been removed. And if you think this was an isolated incident, a moment of madness in an otherwise rational society, you'd be wrong. In 216 BC, after Rome's catastrophic defeat at Cannae, 2 more Vestals were convicted and executed. In 73 BC, another Vestal endured a traumatic trial that destroyed her reputation even though she was acquitted. In 90 AD, the Emperor Domitian became obsessed with moral restoration and had the chief Vestal buried alive without even granting her a trial. These executions always cluster around moments of crisis, moments when Rome felt threatened and needed to feel that something was being done. The Vestal's guilt or innocence was almost irrelevant. What mattered was that they were sacred, set apart, powerful, and therefore their deaths meant something. The higher they stood, the more their fall could purify the city. The system had created women with unprecedented privilege specifically so that privilege could be taken away when Rome needed a spectacle of suffering. And here was perhaps the most haunting detail of all. Most Vestals who survived their 30 years of service never married, never had children, never lived the normal life they'd been denied for 3 decades. They remained forever defined by those years, suspended in that liminal space even after they were technically free. Women like Junia Torquata, who served through the madness of Caligula and Nero, who kept the flame burning while the world descended into chaos, lived out their final years as curiosities honored but fundamentally alone, their primary identity forever sealed as Vestal, even in death. The story of the Vestal Virgins isn't a story about ancient barbarity that we left behind. It's a story about how societies create categories of people who exist outside normal protections, how privilege and extreme vulnerability can inhabit the same person, how the most honored among us can be instantly transformed into scapegoats when fear demands a sacrifice. Aemilia, Licinia, and Marcia weren't killed because they were guilty. They were killed because Rome needed to kill someone who mattered, and they had been made to matter precisely so they could be destroyed when the moment required it. What do you think? Could something like this happen today, where privilege becomes a trap and honor transforms into a target? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Sometimes the most disturbing thing about history isn't how different the past was from the present, but how terrifyingly similar the patterns remain.